Coming up on Theater Talk.
You can't really get into that as a reporter. I mean, I've learned a long time ago trying to punish people. It doesn't work. It makes you look petty and silly and stupid. And you're going to need the people on the next story that comes along.
Absolutely.
So.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
Well, Michael, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy myself today because we have your rival for the most powerful theater reporter in New York City, and I just want to watch the fur fly.
Indeed we do. Patrick Healy is really shaking things up on Broadway as the theater correspondent for the New York Times. He has aggressive, prolific coverage. I am feeling the hot breath of competition on the back of my neck, so I've invited Patrick to Theater Talk today to poison him. Welcome, Patrick, and cheers!
Good to be here!
Drink up!
I'll put that down.
That's right. All right, Patrick, you've been on the beat now for the Times covering Broadway for over a year, I guess.
Yeah.
But you came from the Hillary Clinton campaign. Mm-hmm. And before that, I think you also covered Afghanistan.
That's right.
So I want to know, who is the smoothest liar? Hamid Karzai, Hillary Clinton, or your average Broadway press agent?
That is a very fair question. Hillary was she was very, very tough, and she cared a lot about image. And Broadway press agents, I have been really struck by how protective they are of shows that may clearly be in trouble, shows that have backstage drama going on, but everything is buffed and polished in a way of, this is going to be fine, this is going to be a great show. It sort of does surprise me sometimes.
Who are the biggest leakers? More leakers in politics or on Broadway?
In politics,
really?
Much more.
Why?
It's interesting. While producers often say, we don't want to hurt each other's shows, off the record, which is information we can't really do much of, there's so much backbiting going on,
right.
But there's reluctance to create kind of, I think, sort of a plan to either sort of help your show with some kind of leak or,
run down someone else's show.
Yeah,
to boost
absolutely.
yours.
Whereas in politics, there were so many mini strategies that were going on. With Hillary, her donors, for instance, were very useful sources. Now, these are people who were giving money to her, wanted to be at the table to advise her, but they also were trying to convey constructive criticism about her through the media.
Right.
So they would kind of, say critical things. And I've been just struck in theater how it seems like to raise any kind of criticism, even on background, which is something that we could use, there's a real reluctance for it. And I guess one of the things that I've learned is just how so few shows succeed, financially. And for theater folks, the stakes are so high, to keep a contract with certain producers, to keep in the good graces of certain producers.
And you might be working with somebody you're in competition with this season. Next season, you might be partners on a show.
Absolutely. And the way that also in politics, there are so many consultants and publicists. On Broadway, there are just a handful. I mean, there's so many monopolies that are going on Broadway, whether it's press agents, unions, the trade associations, certain producers. So it can be very hard to crack. For me, and the Times, I feel like it has been a real challenge to sort of crack those nuts.
Well, you're hampered in a way that I am not at the Post because I can use all the background stuff. I can use the anonymous quotes, all that kind of stuff. But you have sort of stricter rules about this kind of thing, which I would think makes it very hard to cover Broadway because, as we know, people are quite funny off the record and quite bitchy and gossipy, but you can't get that color unless it's on the record.
Right. One of the things I like about your column is that you cover Broadway as it is. There is a lot of gossip, there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of real news that's going on, but for some reason, and I guess I get it, the theater world has always treated the Times as sort of on high, it's sort of this Mount Olympus, and if something's in Michael Riedel's column, that's okay, but if it's in the Times, somehow then it becomes, not so much real, but sort of dangerous, I guess. I've had people who've said to me, well, this is a story idea that's more of a Riedel idea, and then this is a story idea that's a Healy idea. And, you know, what I'm trying to been saying is, you know, there are things that the Times can work with, but our sourcing standards, you know, are different. We have to get sometimes into these pretzels of 4 people said on condition of anonymity.
That amuses me
like
because
that.
I think sometimes, you know, we're just covering Broadway here after all.
Exactly.
But it's like 4 executives spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss
Right?
the fact that the play might be moving to another theater.
That's the thing. And the thing is
Times
that
attributions are longer than my column.
But you know, Michael, knowing you as long as I have, I know that there is the problem that a lot of producers want their information to come out first in the Times, and they'll hold it back from you. You often get it anyway, but they hold information back that you know, that somehow they feel it must come out in the Times, or there'll be consequences. Would there be consequences?
Oh, I don't think consequences. I'm trying to think of an example. I don't. I mean, I'm not into sort of punishment, you know. I mean, the Hillary and when I covered John Kerry as well, there was so competitive with the Washington Post, with the Journal. There were so many sort of the old kind of boys in the bus system, you know, people back there. You know, but you know, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people do want the story. For instance, press agents want the story in the Times because they're getting paid by producers, and the producers still think of the New York Times, you know, as a place that, you know, theater goers are going to read, you know, more likely. So, but I don't think we've ever had, or at least I don't have any sort of tradition of, you know, of punishing in that way.
Well, the Times has had certain shows that they won't write about. I mean, is this not true? That sometimes, you know, that they'll get on the wrong side of a show, and then that show is just not in the Times anymore.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there are any shows that I've avoided writing about because of some sort of history. Like I don't get that message.
You can't really get into that as a reporter. I mean, I've learned a long time ago trying to punish people. It doesn't work. It makes you look petty and silly and stupid. And you're going to need the people on the next story that comes along.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's just with the rough and tumble. But it's interesting what, you know, I've from my perspective, working at the Post all these years and always being in competition with the Times, in some ways it has played into it's helped me, it's played into my favor that producers want to get a lot of things in the Times because they want to get a lot of stuff in the Times that is not all that interesting to me. Right. They don't want to call you with, hey, do you know we're going to fire the actress? That's not what they're calling you with. Absolutely. They want you to announce their play going here, they have a nice new cast for this, they have a new theater being built. And so I always found that in the past, that tied up a lot of reporters to cover these gift-wrapped things and left me a lot of freedom to range and really burrow in and go after the stuff that my natural bent allows me to follow.
And I'm envious of that freedom. You know, I do not ever like to think of myself or the Times as, you know, a press release paper of record, you know, and I know the Times had that motto, sort of the paper of record, you know, business, but for me, I want to be part of a good story, you know, and I want to develop, you know, more of the sources, you know, like you have, who really tell you what's going on. This world is one, you know, that's driven by, yes, you know, artistic aspirations, you know, creative ambition, but also by gossip and egos, and that's part of the story, and that's what we should be covering.
But you can't.
So we'd get very caught up in casting announcements. You know, if I'm spending an hour and a half of my day writing up, you know, 500 words on the unveiling of a production, hopefully it's not an hour and a half, that's time that I'm not spending on, you know, stories that I think are more readable.
Yeah, where there's blood in the water.
Absolutely.
But you can't win at the Times, because if you stop doing those kind of stories, the theater community would be up in arms because they feel, well, you are the paper of record. And the world should know that we're moving this show here and that we're building a new theater there, and you know, we expect the Times to announce those kind of things. Where then if you go after the tougher stories, then they get mad and they say, I can't believe the Times would go after this kind of gossipy story.
Well, there was that front page story last fall about the Starry Messenger and what was going on with Matthew Broderick, and we got
when he couldn't remember his lines.
Couldn't remember his lines, and Kenny Lonergan was changing the play every day, and there was a real meltdown going on, and I got so much blowback for that story because, you know, why are you writing about a show in previews? And this is just sort of gossipy, you know, stuff
it's on
that
the
doesn't
internet. The
matter.
internet
You know,
chatter,
it's
all
on
that
the
stuff,
internet.
And
Doesn't
why
matter.
were you?
And why would we? Because we wanted to do it. It started out with a different story. Up at actor was fired up at for Orphans Home Cycle, who was looking at a prompt in his hat. And so I was just reporting this story about that, and an editor said, well, how often do actors put little things on stage to prompt them? And then it was total coincidence that then on Monday night, the first preview of the Starry Messenger,
You did those lines.
I got 3 emails from people saying, I just paid $75 and Matthew Broderick called out for a line 10 times. And I, as a newcomer, you know, had to answer the question for myself, well, how unusual is that? And some
Not
of
for
the,
Matthew.
and so, well,
Hey, it
no, but
was a
some of the
long,
Broadway-
hard part.
it was a long play and a long, hard
Matthew
part.
has a long reputation
love
of
you,
not knowing those lines at the first preview.
tricky.
Hey, you know, we have a minute left.
Sorry, let him finish
sorry.
his thought. You were gonna...
No, but you know, part of the blowback was the Times does not write this kind of story.
Right.
What does this mean? The Times writes nice profiles of actors or casting announcements. And you know, one of the things that gets my goat the most is when someone tells me what a Times story is. You know, granted, I'm new to theater. There are traditions to be respected and, you know, stories to do, but I like to see it as a really broad canvas and not just, you know, regurgitating what people want to serve me up. I like exclusives, but I'd like to work for them rather than have me handed them to me because we're the Times.
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, Pat Healy, you're doing a great job at the Times. I mean, my God, they have you working all the time. I mean, blogging, and then there's a story in the paper. But I welcome the competition. It's fun, and I think between the two of us, we can pretty much bring this industry to its knees.
Hey, Pat, can you come back at Tony nomination time?
Absolutely.
Pat Healy from the New York Times, thanks for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Susan.
Here it comes! Ho-ho-ho! Unveil it, boys.
Oh, it's champagne! Oh, gee, take a few in the sport.
Michael, this week's guest, essentially invented off-Broadway.
Indeed, he did. He was the founder of the legendary Circle in the Square Theater. Ted Mann has written a book about creating that theater, Journeys in the Night, Creating a New American Theater with Circle in the Square. And we're very happy that Ted Mann is joining us on Theater Talk
Thank
tonight.
you. Thank you. Pleasure.
Welcome. All right, you can't really overstate your importance in the American theater because you, along with the great director Jose Quintero, brought Eugene O'Neill, the great American playwright, back to the forefront. What was the first O'Neill play you did at Circle in the Square? And
The
how did you,
Iceman Cometh.
And how did you come? Why did you decide to do that play?
For years, I've been trying to get the rights to an O'Neill play, and every year I would call the agent, would say no. You know, and I said, well, can't we do one of the lesser known? No. And this year, 1956, I called and she said, well, I'm going to ask Mrs. O'Neill.
Carlotta,
yeah. And at that, I had read his plays when I was younger, and I always felt, you know, I had a kinship with it. And also at that time, we were broke, dead broke.
the theater, yeah.
And The Iceman Cometh has a cast of 25, 4.5 hours long. And I thought if we're going to go down, let's go down big. You know?
I like that way of thinking.
And so she said, Mrs. O'Neill would like to meet you and Jose. And we had read The Iceman and loved it. And as you know, in 1946, it had been done right after World War II. And it was considered a lesser play. You know, the reviews, if you look at them, were kind of like kind.
And the failure of it really broke O'Neill's heart, did it not?
Oh yes, because I mean, I guess he felt that was one of his great plays. It was also one of his sort of breakaway from his tradition of the style of play that he was writing.
So you got to meet Eugene O'Neill's widow, Carlotta, to convince her to let you have the rights to Iceman Cometh. How did you do that?
Well, we went, we researched what plays. She had said through the agent, well, which of his plays would you like to do? And I said, well, we'd like to do The Iceman, which we had just discovered. And so when we came in to see Mrs. O'Neill, she was delighted and immediately gave us the rights to do it, not having seen anything of what we were doing at all.
And this is the
But
play.
she's also relayed what you just said, you know, that it had broken his heart.
And so any resurrection, even though she didn't know who was going to resurrect it, would be a worthy gamble because it had failed so badly in the first production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this Iceman production was, of course, seminal because it also introduced the world to Jason Robards.
Yeah.
When you meet someone like Jason Robards when he's a young man, what struck you about him that this guy can tackle this 4.5-hour play?
We cast the Iceman. All the roles were cast, including Jason, in a lesser role. Larry Parrott, he played, you know. And then we also had Howard Da Silva was playing Hickey.
Yeah.
Physically, he fits the description that O'Neill has in the script. And then I got a call from Howard saying he couldn't do it. He got a movie offer, and at that time we were paying $50 a week, and he had to take this, you know. So now we were stuck with it, and Jose and I were up in my office and trying to decide, well, who else could do it, you know. And one of the assistants came up and said, Jason's downstairs, he wants to see you. Jason and I used to hang out together. And so I went down. Jason obviously had a couple of drinks, and he had a script in his hand. And he said, I gotta read for Hickey. I said, you're already in the play, Jason. You're playing Parrot's a great role. He said, I gotta read for Hickey. And before I could say anything, he burst into the 45-minute monologue. And about 10 minutes into it, I've got chills up and down my back, you know. And I said, okay, Jason, take it easy, sit down. I'm going to get Jose. So I went upstairs. I said, Jose, Jason's down there. And Jose went, he wants to play Hickey. Jose goes, And I said, well, you go down and see him. And I saw just something really exceptional, what I just heard. So he went down. About 10 minutes later, he came back. He was all smiles. And he said, wait 15 minutes in a Spanish accent. Wait 15 minutes until Jason gets home. He lived over in the meatpacking district, on 14th Street. And when he picks up the phone, ask for Hickey. And that's the character's name. So that's how Jason found out.
And of course, that was launched Jason Robards' career and really established you as the off-Broadway theater movement, because it was Brooks Atkinson who saw that production and gave you the monumentally great review in the New York Times.
Well, but I mean, our connection as a major force, let's say, or the birth of off-Broadway happened with Summer and Smoke.
Right, Geraldine Page.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, famous production.
And that also had been a play that had failed on Broadway. We hadn't seen it. And we were looking for a play for Jerry Page, who Jose knew from the Goodman School.
Right.
And Jose came one day after looking through lots of scripts and said, I found it. And what did you find? Summer and Smoke. We read it, the rest of the people on the board, and we liked it too. And Jerry was called in, and I said, Jerry, we want you to play Alma. Oh, she said, oh, bless you, now they can hear me. Now they'll hear me, meaning the public, the critics,
And was your theater open to the extent that, an actor, a total unknown actor just struggling out there could show up on the doorstep and ask for an audition, try to get in? Were you that open to everybody coming in?
Well, there was a show business paper, and we put something in there about casting, and the people would come. They didn't have to come through an agent. Whoever called, we set up an appointment for them. And I mean, in relationship to that, when we were doing Children of Darkness, the same thing happened. We were in rehearsal, and the man playing Lord Wainwright also got a television thing, and he couldn't play it. So there we were stuck without somebody to play Lord Wainwright. And I came up from a rehearsal that was going on, and I passed the dressing room, and lying on the cot was this big figure, with his hands on his chest, napping, and he had he was unshaven like 3 or 4 days. He had his coat up, the collar all around his neck like this. And as I passed by, I said, whoa. I backed up. I looked at him again, and I went downstairs. I said, Jose, I think Lord Wainwright is upstairs. And I went back to the sleeping giant, and I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, excuse me, Mr. Quintero can see you now. So he picked himself up, like this, real slow like this. Took his coat off, put it over his shoulders, and walked down the steps like an emperor. He walked in, and before he even said a word, Jose went like this to me. And so I handed him the script. I said, come back in 4 days. He said, well, I can do it tomorrow. So he came back in the next day. He was letter perfect.
And he was?
George C. Scott.
Cast while sleeping.
What do you think have been being a leader in the off-Broadway nonprofit institutional theater movement, creator of it in many ways? What do you think about our big nonprofit theaters today? I think of the Roundabout Manhattan Theater Club. You were doing O'Neill, you were doing Williams, you were doing plays that had failed, you were taking incredible risks doing this. Nowadays our nonprofits are doing old musicals, sort of sitcom type plays, and it's all about stars. Does that disappoint
Well, some
you?
I wouldn't say all. I mean, some are
But a
doing
lot
it.
of the big ones are.
Yeah,
Where's that
Roundabout.
sense of adventure that you and Jose had when you were creating theater?
The whole thing is totally different. It's like go to dinner at somebody's house. They have served that kind of dinner. Go to somebody else's house. It's a lot of people helping and so forth. In our case, we didn't have anybody to help. The nonprofit giving didn't really exist.
Yeah.
So we were doing whatever we could do with whatever money we had. And productions at that time cost anywhere. We could do one for probably $2,000.
Yeah.
Today, the same thing would probably cost close to $1 million, $1.5 million or more.
So you've been poor in the theater, and you've been well off in the theater. Did the poor phase stimulate you in a way that
I love challenge.
Yes. So do you think you would have lost? Do you think that the Circle in the Square would have been less if you'd been amply endowed from earlier on? If you'd had more capital?
Yeah. I think so. I think it's good to have your back up against the wall. And I find for myself, when my back is up against the wall, everything else clears away, and I see that's what we need to do. It's like an instant light comes on.
So necessity breeds invention
I
in the
think
theater.
so.
Yeah.
I think that's true in the art world.
It makes for
certainly
better
with
work.
painters and musicians, composers.
I wanted to ask you one more thing. Before you got it, as you were starting Circle in the Square, you really had been trained in performance space management by working for your father in a jazz club. Isn't that true?
Yeah, well, my father was involved in jazz clubs on 52nd Street, in the 52nd Street at the time when it was really the jazz clubs. And he was involved with 3 different clubs there. And then it was later when it was with Birdland and Basin Street East. But I was watching the interrelationship between the performers and the management, and I learned a lot from that.
What's the best thing you learned about how the management should treat the performers?
Be friendly, be human, and help when you can. Many times people need a little extra money. They got in a debt or something like that.
So you would pass out a little cash from time to time to the actors who were a little pinched?
Sure, yeah.
So that certainly shows dealing with musicians in the jazz world, who's with their erratic lives and always a need for money. You brought that empathy into the theater world, and it served you well.
Also, I liked actors, so it became part of my social life. My wife and myself. My wife was an opera singer.
Yes, very well known.
I was living that side of the world, not being an actor or a performer myself, and it just is a place I like to be. With artists.
I think there's a sad strain, though, to all of this in the book. I wonder if it's true that now that the city is so rich, and you have to be rich to live in Greenwich Village, can you have that kind of lively art scene with young people who have no money, who are sleeping on couches and turn in great performances?
Yeah.
Or is that over if you're in a city now that's only for the elite and the rich?
I don't think so. I think just as hard as it was for us to find a place, when we found the place on Sheridan Square, it had been a nightclub. And my father had recommended we go there to look at it because it was hard to find places to rent. Yeah. And I saw this 3-sided thing. I thought, well, this is like, dance floor, bandstand. I thought this could make it like a little Greek theater, and I liked it. And so I think a lot of the things you pick up in life, and it's so interesting that So my father had these clubs, involved in these clubs, 52nd Street, Birdland, and I once had to pay back some money that we borrowed to do a show with some, let's say, dark figures, slanted hats and cigarettes and so forth. And I was to walk up. He was leaning against the building that was Jack Dempsey's restaurant, and I was told, he's going to wear a hat, he's holding a newspaper, he's smoking a cigarette. Just put the $200 in, don't ask him anything, and walk away. Well, it turns out that whole area that I was living in, my father was working in, was where we are now. It's like I never went away.
Yeah.
The 50th, 52nd, 53rd Street.
Where the Circle and Square is today. Yeah. Well, the book is full of these great stories of the great actors and very evocative of that period in New York artistic life. Journey in the Night, Creating a New American Theater, Circle in the Square, a memoir by Ted Mann, and we're delighted that he's been our guest tonight on Theater Talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And it still goes on, the Circle in the Square. We should add.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.